let's take a look at power and leadership. Power refers to the capacity that A has to influence the behavior of B so that B complies with A's wishes. Someone can thus have power but not use it. It's a capacity or potential. Probably the most important aspect of power is that it's a function of dependence. The greater B's dependence on A, the greater A's power in the relationship. Money is a powerful variable for dependence. Leaders use power as a means of attaining group goals. Power does not require goal compatibility, just dependence. Leadership, on the other hand, requires some congruence between the goals of the leader and those being led. Leadership research focuses on the downward influence on followers. It minimizes the importance of lateral and upward influence patterns. Power research takes all factors into consideration. Leadership concentrates on the individual leader's influence, while the study of power acknowledges that groups as well as individuals can use power to control other individuals or groups. You may have noted that for a power situation to exist, one person or group needs to have control over resources that the other person or group values. This is usually the case in established leadership situations. However, power relationships are possible in all areas of life, and power can be obtained in many ways. Formal power is based on an individual's position in an organization. The coercive power base depends on the target's fear of negative results from failing to comply. The opposite of coercive power is reward power, which people comply with because it produces positive benefits. Someone who can distribute rewards that others view as valuable has power over them. These rewards can be financial, such as controlling pay raises, rates, or bonuses, or non-financial, including things like recognition, promotions, interesting work assignments, friendly colleagues, and preferred work shifts or sales territories. In formal groups or organizations, probably the most common power basis is legitimate power. It represents the formal authority to control and use organizational resources based on the person's structural position in the organization. Legitimate power is broader than the power to coerce and reward. Specifically, it includes members' acceptance of the authority of a hierarchical position. We associate power so closely with the concept of hierarchy that just drawing longer lines in an organizational chart leads people to infer that leaders are especially powerful. In general, when school principals or bank presidents speak, teachers and tellers usually comply. Many individual contributors have power, but they aren't managers and they have no formal power in the organization. What they have is personal power, which comes from an individual's unique characteristics. There are two bases of personal power: expertise and the respect and admiration of others. Expert power is influence wielded as a result of expertise, special skills, or knowledge. As jobs become more specialized, we become dependent on experts to achieve goals. These specialists wield power as a result of their expertise. Referent power is based on identification with a person who has desirable resources or personal traits. If I like, respect, and admire you, you can exercise power over me because I want to please you. Referent power develops out of an admiration of another and a desire to be like that person. It helps explain, for instance, why celebrities are paid millions of dollars to endorse products in commercials. Some people who are not in formal leadership positions have referent power because of their likability. Of the three bases of formal power and two bases of personal power, which are most important? Research suggests the personal sources of power are most effective. Both expert and referent power are positively related to employees' satisfaction with supervision, their organizational commitment, and their performance, whereas regard and legitimate power seem to be unrelated to those outcomes. One source of formal power, coercive power, can be damaging. Referent power can be a powerful motivator. The most important aspect of power is that it's a function of dependence. Let's begin with a general postulate. The greater B's dependence on A, the more power A has over B. When you possess anything others require that you alone control, you make them dependent on you, and therefore you gain power over them. If something is plentiful, possessing it will not increase your power. Therefore, the more you can expand your own options, the less power you place in the hands of others. This explains why most organizations develop multiple suppliers rather than give their business to only one. It also explains why many people aspire to financial independence. Independence reduces the power others can wield to limit our access to opportunities and resources. Dependence increases when the resource you control is important, scarce, and non-substitutable. If nobody wants what you have, it's not going to create dependence. Note, however, that there are many degrees of importance, from needing the resource for survival to wanting a resource that's in fashion or adds a convenience. We see the scarcity-dependence relationship in the power situation of employment. Where the supply of labor is low relative to demand, workers can negotiate compensation and benefits packages far more attractive than those in occupations with an abundance of candidates. For example, college administrators have no problem finding English instructors because there are a high supply and low demand. In contrast, the market for network systems analysts is tight, with demand high and supply limited. The fewer viable substitutes for a resource, the more power a person controlling that resource has. One tool to assess the exchange of resources and dependencies is social network analysis. This method examines patterns of communication among organizational members to identify how information flows between them. Within a social network, each individual or group is called a node, and the links between nodes are called ties. When nodes communicate or exchange resources frequently, they're said to have very strong ties. Other nodes that are not engaged in direct communication with one another achieve resource flows through intermediary nodes. In other words, some nodes act as brokers between otherwise unconnected nodes. Networks can create substantial power dynamics, such as enforcing norms or creating change within an organization. Thus, employees who have many connections to an organization's social network are less likely to engage in corruption. Those in the position of brokers tend to have more power because they can leverage the unique resources they acquire from different groups. A social network analysis in an organization can be implemented in many ways. Some organizations keep track of the flow of email communications or document sharing across departments. Other organizations look at data from human resource information systems, analyzing how supervisors and subordinates interact. These data sources can produce sociograms showing how resources and power flow. Leaders can then identify powerful brokers who exert the strongest influence on many groups. What power tactics do people use to translate power basis into specific action? What options do they have for influencing their bosses, coworkers, or employees? Research has identified 9 distinct influence tactics. Legitimacy. Relying on your authority position or saying that a request is in accordance with organizational policies or rules. Rational persuasion. Presenting logical arguments and factual evidence to demonstrate that a request is reasonable. Inspirational appeals. Developing emotional commitment by appealing to a target's values, needs, hopes, and aspiration. Consultation. Increasing support by involving the target in deciding how to accomplish your plan. Exchange. Rewarding the target with benefits or favors in exchange for accepting the request. Personal appeals. Asking for compliance based on friendship or loyalty. Ingratiation. Using flattery, praise, or friendly behavior prior to making a request. Pressure. Using warnings, repeated demands, and threats. Coalitions. Enlisting the aid or support of others to persuade the target to agree. Some tactics are more effective than others. Rational persuasion, inspirational appeals, and consultation tend to be the most effective, especially when the audience is highly interested in the outcomes of the decision process. The pressure tactics tends to backfire and is typically the least effective of the 9. In general, you're more likely to be effective if you begin with softer tactics that rely on personal power. If these fail, you can move to harder tactics which emphasize formal power and incur greater cost and risks. The effectiveness of tactics depends on the audience. People especially likely to comply with soft power tactics tend to be more reflective and intrinsically motivated. They might have high self-esteem and a greater desire for control. Those likely to comply with hard power tactics are more action-oriented and extrinsically motivated. There's certainly evidence that there are corrupting aspects of power. Power leads people to place their own interests ahead of the other's needs or goals. It also appears to lead individuals to objectify others, to see them as tools to obtain their instrumental goals, and to see relationships as more peripheral. Those given power are more likely to make self-interested decisions when faced with a moral hazard and are more willing to degrade others. Power also leads to overconfident decision-making. Power does appear to have some disturbing effects on us, but it's more complicated than that. It doesn't affect everyone in the same way, and there are even positive effects of power. One study found, for example, that while power made people behave in a self-serving manner, when accountability for this behavior was initiated, the self-serving behavior stopped. We have the means to blunt the negative effects of power. One study showed that simply expressing gratitude towards powerful others makes them less likely to act aggressively against us. Power energizes and increases motivation to achieve goals. It is not so much that power corrupts as it reveals what we value. Another study found that power led to self-interested behavior only in those with a weak moral identity. In those with a strong moral identity, power enhanced their moral awareness and willingness to act. There's no shortage of definitions of organizational politics. Essentially, this type of politics focuses on the use of power to affect decision-making in an organization, sometimes for self-serving and organizationally unsanctioned behaviors. Political behavior in organizations consists of activities that are not required as part of an individual's formal role, but that influence the distribution of advantages and disadvantages within the organization. Political behavior is outside specified job requirements. It requires some attempt to use power basis. It includes efforts to influence the goals, criteria, or processes used for decision making. Our definition is broad enough to include varied political behaviors such as withholding key information from decision makers, whistleblowing, spreading rumors, leaking confidential information to the media, or exchanging favors. In this way, political behavior is often negative, but not always. Interviews with experienced managers show that most believe political behavior is a major part of organizational life. Many managers report some use of political behavior as ethical, as long as it doesn't directly harm anyone else. Organizations have individuals in groups with different values, goals, and interests. This sets up the potential for conflict over the allocation of limited resources, such as budgets, workspace, and salary and bonus pools. If resources were abundant, all constituencies within an organization could satisfy goals. Maybe the most important factor leading to politics is the realization that most of the facts used to allocate resources are open for interpretation. When allocating pay based on performance, for instance, what is good performance? Because most decisions have to be made in a climate of ambiguity, where facts are rarely objective and thus open to interpretation, people within organizations will use whatever influence they can to support their goals and interests. For an organization to be politics-free, all members of that organization should hold the same goals and interests. Organizational resources must not be scarce, and the performance outcomes must be completely clear and objective. But that doesn't describe the organizational world in which most of us live. Not all groups or organizations are equally political. In some organizations, politicking is overt and rampant, while in others, politics plays a small role in influencing outcomes. There are a number of factors that appear to encourage political behavior. At the individual level, researchers have identified certain personality traits, needs, and other factors likely to be related to political behavior. In terms of traits, we find that employees who are high self-monitors, possess an internal locus of control, and have a high need for power are more likely to engage in political behavior. The more alternate job opportunities an individual has due to a favorable job market, possession of scarce skills or knowledge, prominent reputation, or influential contacts outside the organization, the more likely the person is to employ politics. An individual with low expectations of success from political means is unlikely to use them. Some individuals engage in more political behavior because they're simply better at it. Such individuals read interpersonal interactions well, fit their behavior to situational needs, and excel at networking. These people are often indirectly rewarded for their political effort. Although we acknowledge the role that differences can play, the evidence much more strongly suggests that certain situations and cultures promote politics. When resources are reduced, people may engage in political actions to safeguard what they have. Cultures characterized by low trust, role ambiguity, democratic decision making, high pressure for performance, and self serving senior managers will also create breeding grounds for politicking. Role ambiguity means that the prescribed employee behaviors are not clear. Therefore, there are fewer limits to the scope and function of the employee's political action. The more an organizational culture emphasizes zero-sum or win-lose approach to reward allocations, the more employees will be motivated to engage in politicking. The zero-sum approach treats rewards as fixed, so any gain for one comes at the expense of another. For most people who have modest political outcomes tend to be predominantly negative. Politics may lead to self-reported declines in employee performance, perhaps because employees perceive political environments to be unfair, which demotivates them. The politics-performance relationship appears to be moderated by an individual's understanding of the hows and whys of organizational politics. When both politics and understanding are high, performance is likely to increase because these individuals see political activity as an opportunity. Political behavior at work moderates the effects of ethical leadership. When employees see politics as a threat, they often respond with defensive behaviors, reactive and proactive behaviors to avoid action, blame, or change. In the short run, employees may find that defensiveness protects their self-interest, but in the long run it wears them down. People who rely on defensiveness find that eventually it's the only way they know how to behave. At that point, they lose the trust and support of their peers, bosses, employees, and their clients. We know people have an ongoing interest in how others perceive and evaluate them. Impression management describes how individuals attempt to control the impressions others form of them. Low self-monitors tend to present images of themselves that are consistent with their personalities, regardless of the beneficial or deferential effects for them. In contrast, high self-monitors are good at reading situations and modeling or molding their approaches and behavior to fit a situation. Keep in mind that when people engage in IM, they're sending a false message that might be true under other circumstances. Excuses, for instance, may be offered with sincerity. The evidence indicates that most job applicants use IM techniques in interviews and that it works. Interviewers are rarely able to detect when an individual is engaging in impression management. In terms of performance evaluations, it appears that individuals high in political skill are able to translate IM into higher performance appraisals, whereas those with lower political skill are more likely to be hurt by their IM attempt. Ingratiation can lead to higher levels of liking from supervisors and performance ratings alike. There are some questions to consider when differentiating ethical from unethical politicking. When faced with an ethical dilemma regarding organizational politics, try to consider whether playing politics is worth the risk and whether others might be harmed in the process. Outright lies may be an extreme example of impression management, but many of us have at least distorted information to make a favorable impression. Complimenting a supervisor on her appearance in order to curry favor is probably much less harmful than grabbing credit for a project that others deserve. Unfortunately, powerful people can become very good at explaining self-serving behaviors in terms of the organization's best interests. They can persuasively argue that unfair actions are really fair and just. Those who are powerful, articulate, and persuasive are most vulnerable to ethical lapses because they're more likely to get away with them. If you have a strong power base, recognize the ability of power to corrupt. It may be easier for the powerless to act ethically, as they typically have little political discretion to exploit.